The hum of fluorescent lights blended with the hiss of the espresso machine as morning flickered to life inside the cafe. A low, lazy soundtrack seeped through the speakers, barely louder than the grinder that roared with impatience every few minutes. Behind the counter, routines unfolded like muscle memory. Hands wiped surfaces, refilled jars, arranged croissants with plastic gloves and sleepy precision. The smell of vanilla syrup masked the scent of fatigue. Outside, the sky was a smudge of blue and gray. Street vendors unlatched carts. City buses yawned steam at every intersection, and the sidewalks filled with hurried footsteps. But on the eastern corner of the block, a man stood still, not out of place, just out of rhythm. His coat was dark, not luxurious, not ragged, functional, the kind of fabric chosen for long days on feet and uncertain weather. His shoes were clean but aged. The soles barely whispered on the pavement when he walked. He didn't carry a bag, or a phone, or a visible agenda. He walked into the cafe just as the door clicked open for business. No greeting was offered, not because they were rude, but because they were busy, or so they thought. The woman behind the register didn't lift her head. The man pulling shots behind the bar didn't glance up. The manager sat at a corner table, a tablet propped on one knee, thumbs tapping notes into a report that wouldn't be read twice. The inspector crossed the floor without drawing attention. He paused near the pastry case. The lighting was bright, but revealed more than sweetness. A fly, trapped beneath the glass, twitched between two danishes. A smear of jam curled upward like a forgotten fingerprint. The seal on the refrigerated case buzzed faintly, warmer than it should be. No one noticed him noticing. He turned slowly toward the counter. The stainless steel bar gleamed in spots and dulled in others. Cleaned for show, not for safety. The sink behind the counter was full of mugs. No drying rack. Just a pile half submerged, half forgotten. Milk jugs stacked in a tower against regulations. Aprons hung over the dishwasher vents. Still, no one looked at him. Not truly. Not until he moved behind the dividing line. One step. No announcement. No aggression. Just the gentle placement of one foot on the staff side of the floor. That's when the barista noticed. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Then annoyance. The sound of the towel being dropped onto the counter made a soft slap. He turned toward the inspector with narrowed eyes, said nothing, but his body said everything. Who are you? Why are you here? You don't belong. A second later, the shift manager stood. Her heels clicked against the tile. She moved with manufactured authority. A smile stretched too thin, a tone rehearsed for confrontation. She approached from the side, speaking low and slow, hands out in placation, posture defensive. The inspector didn't respond, didn't retreat, didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted his head slightly, eyes scanning the posted documentation on the wall near the prep station. Licenses, last inspection certificate, allergy notices. One was missing, another was expired. He blinked slowly, and then moved again, this time toward the kitchen. That was when they stopped him. The barista's voice rose, sharp, dismissive. The words came clear now. You don't even work here. Everything froze. No customers had entered yet. Just the staff. Just the tension. Just the assumptions. The manager's face flushed slightly. Not with anger, but uncertainty. She looked at the man again. Really looked. And something shifted. His posture wasn't casual. It was intentional. His shoes weren't decorative, they were practical. His coat didn't hide wealth or need. It hid authority. Real authority. The kind that doesn't ask for approval. It was too late now. He didn't smile. Didn't gloat. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and retrieved a small case. Black, matte, government issue. He opened it, flashed it, set it on the counter, and continued his walk. The health inspector, unannounced, on time, invisible until they made the mistake of trying to stop him. Now the room had a different hum, not of music, but of fear, of realization, of guilt finally exposed to light. Behind the counter, the barista backed away. The manager fumbled with her tablet, scrolling frantically for checklists she hadn't updated in weeks. In the kitchen, a dish rack fell with a crash as a worker tried to clean what had long been ignored. The inspector didn't flinch. He took out a slim notepad and began to write, not because they had challenged him, but because they had shown him exactly what he came to see. The pen moved slowly, not rushed, not paused. A quiet gliding motion that filled small white boxes on the form tucked beneath his hand while his other hand pressed gently against the corner of the counter as if he were measuring its weight, its balance, its story. Because everything told one. The smudge on the register screen, the fine grit under the cutting board, the condensation pooling below the undercounter fridge. The cafe had gone nearly silent. Behind him, the air thickened with the presence of people who now wished they hadn't spoken. The manager stood near the espresso machine, her arms crossed too tightly, her body pretending calm while her eyes scanned for gaps, leaks, since she hadn't known were visible until now. The barista who had first confronted the inspector was no longer looking at him. He was wiping down surfaces already wet, hoping to erase something deeper than dust. But the inspector didn't speak. He never did until the end. Instead, he moved. Each step deliberate. Not slow. Not fast. Just steady. Past the counter. Past the bread shelf, into the hallway where the walls lost their design polish and became institutional, white tile, fluorescent lighting too harsh, doors unmarked or mislabeled. He entered the dry storage first. The door creaked. Inside, towers of paper cups, boxes of sugar, bags of flour with rolled-down tops. One bag was unsealed. Mouse droppings along the baseboard confirmed what the staff likely never checked. He knelt slowly, made a note, stood. His breath fogged slightly in the cold hallway as he moved to the walk-in refrigerator. The floor was damp. The mats were curled at the corners. Labels were faded, handwritten dates blurred by condensation. He opened one plastic container, prepped chicken, marinating in a liquid darker than it should have been. Another container held slices of lemon, some already browned. A tub of yogurt sat without a lid. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He simply noted. Moved on. Then came the mop sink closet. Small, forgotten, half-lit. The bucket was full of gray water. The mop head was dry. He looked once at the slanted floor drain where hair clung like forgotten threads. He shut the door gently. At the far end of the kitchen, a young prep worker was stirring something at the stove. His hands trembled. He didn't look up. The inspector paused beside him. A single drop of sweat fell from the boy's temple to the surface of the stew. The inspector tilted his head, made another mark on the paper, then moved on. The final room was the staff break area. Cramped. A cracked microwave. A fridge with the rubber seal half detached. A bench with a broken leg stabilized by a box of napkins. A bulletin board covered in taped notices. One stood out: deep cleaning schedule, signed weekly. The last signature was 4 weeks old. He wrote it down. Turned. Walked back through the corridor. At the edge of the kitchen, the barista stood again, this time trying to smile, offering him a coffee, a bottle of water, a second chance. He didn't take it. He didn't need performance. He needed truth. He returned to the front counter and stood exactly where he had first been dismissed. Now the staff watched him differently. Now the silence wasn't ignorance, it was tension stretched tight like a wire between two buildings. He reviewed his notes in silence. Every unchecked box. Every infraction. Not to punish. To reveal. Because beneath the tile and sugar and playlists and lighting, this wasn't about rules. It was about care. And what happens when care is treated like a formality instead of a foundation. He tore the top page free. Signed it. Folded it once. Placed it on the counter. Then turned. Not toward the exit, but toward the posted license wall. He reached up slowly. Removed the outdated inspection. Placed a red temporary closure tag in its place. The adhesive clicked against the wall. And then, only then, he spoke. Not aloud. Just a final notation. The kind that ended arguments. And closed doors. The kind that echoed far beyond the cafe. The door shut behind him with the weight of consequence, not sound. The laminated red tag, fresh and centered on the glass, reflected the street's morning light like a signal flare. It read only what was necessary. Temporarily closed. Health safety violation. Subject to further review. But the silence that followed said everything else. Inside the cafe, the manager remained frozen where she stood. The espresso machine hissed once, as if in protest, then fell quiet. Cups stacked in rows suddenly looked like props. The register's screen timed out to black. Somewhere behind the kitchen wall, a prep cook leaned against the steel sink with his eyes closed and hands shaking, though not from fear of being fired, but from the release of tension he hadn't known he carried. The lie had been peeled away. Not by shouting. Not by shame. But by observation. The inspector walked down the block with no urgency. He didn't look back. He never did. The job was never about confrontation. It was about exposure of habits, of cultures, of corners cut when no one thinks anyone is watching. He passed a florist arranging morning bouquets, a cyclist reading her phone at a red light, a woman walking her dog. None of them knew what had just happened. None of them saw the inspector as anything more than a man on a morning walk. But the cafe would remember him, and the people inside would not forget his silence. He turned the corner, entered a narrow building without signage. Only a metal keypad by the door and a high-mounted security camera gave it away. He pressed the code. The door buzzed open. Inside, cool air welcomed him. No music, no decor. Just clean floors, a wide front desk, and rows of file cabinets along the back wall. The woman behind the counter looked up, recognized him instantly, and gestured without speaking. He passed her and entered the back hallway. To the left, a room with bright light, industrial tile, and a wall lined with white boards. On the table, inspection folders, laminated maps, a tray of sealed envelopes. He placed his form in the inbox, then opened a metal cabinet. Inside, dossiers. He pulled the one marked Branch 12C flagged ongoing, inserted the new report, snapped the file shut, walked away. In the small adjoining office, he hung his jacket on the hook, revealing a pressed shirt with his department badge affixed quietly to the chest. He sat, opened his laptop, reviewed the previous site logs, photos, timestamps, flagged reports filed and ignored. Everything lined up. The violations he documented weren't random. They were systemic. A culture of looking clean while hiding rot. Policies printed but never followed. Staff trained in greetings, not safety. Managers focused on reviews, not responsibilities. He clicked submit. The report joined a digital queue, but it wouldn't stay there long. He attached a priority tag, then leaned back in his chair, and allowed himself a moment of stillness. This wasn't the first place he'd shut down. It wouldn't be the last. Because what most businesses didn't understand was that inspectors weren't just looking for dirt. They were listening for the quiet things, the unspoken rules, the atmosphere, the way teams responded not to rules but to people. He had walked into that cafe expecting the same silence he always faced. But when they told him, "You don't even work here," they had revealed everything. Not because the words were cruel, but because they were habitual. Said too quickly, too confidently. He had heard it before. In supermarkets, salons, department stores. And every time, the result was the same. People only see uniforms. Until they see authority. And by then, it's too late. The office hummed with soft electricity. Outside the building, the afternoon sun moved behind clouds with sluggish reluctance, casting long shadows on the sidewalk below. Inside, the inspector's desk glowed under the steady fluorescent ceiling light. A pool of clarity in a room that asked for nothing more than precision. His computer screen glowed with a completed report. Each entry, time-stamped. Each section, methodical. The violations were not exaggerated. There was no need. The photos told everything. The brown stains spreading under the sink's pipe, the rusted blade of the slicer, the bag of spoiled lemons tucked behind other produce as if rot could be hidden with arrangement. But the report did more than name faults. It reflected decisions. Every dirty corner was a product of routine. Every missing signature was a missing voice. Every brushed-off complaint was now printed in black and white. The inspector clicked, lock file, then turned his attention to the next folder waiting in the physical tray beside him. Another restaurant, another name, another chance to observe the quiet war between appearance and truth. But before he reached for it, his office door creaked open. A woman stood at the frame. She wore the gray suit of an internal district coordinator. Her ID hung from a lanyard across her chest. Her expression was unreadable except for the way she looked at him. Not with question, but with gravity. She handed him a sealed envelope. It bore the department's crest. Marked, confidential, field escalation. He opened it without ceremony. Inside, a memo, a flagged follow-up. Same cafe, different purpose. A formal complaint had been filed. Not by staff, but by the franchise's legal team. They claimed he had no right to be there, that he had not followed protocol, that no scheduled inspection had been logged. He read the words slowly, each line tighter than the last. The accusation wasn't factual. It was tactical, not meant to win, meant to delay, meant to paint him as someone out of place. The irony was bitter. They had doubled down on their mistake, not just the health violations but the assumption at the heart of it, that he didn't look like power, that authority only wore a certain face, moved a certain way, spoke a certain tone. But paper didn't lie, and silence remembered everything. He stood from his chair, pulled the original field assignment from the cabinet. It had his badge number, time of entry, initial complaint, all signatures in place. He placed it in a folder, then added photos, handwritten notes, audio logs from his pocket recorder, time-stamped proof of process. He packed it into a sealed courier pouch and walked it himself to the compliance director's office 3 floors down. No email, no delay. He wanted eyes on it now. The director wasn't surprised to see him. He opened the pouch, reviewed the file page by page, and without saying a word, placed a formal seal on the folder and slipped it into the binder marked "Protected. Investigations with retaliation clauses." That binder was thick. The inspector glanced at it, then nodded once. He didn't need words. Truth moved slower than lies, but it lasted longer. When he returned to his desk, a message blinked on his screen. An internal note. Your presence at the site has triggered review of all locations under this ownership group. Expect further assignments. He leaned back, closed his eyes, not from fatigue, but focus. The story wasn't over. The cafe's red tag would not be the only one. Because once people believe they can deny a man's authority based on how he enters the room, they don't just violate policy. They violate dignity. And dignity answers back. Quietly, through process, through truth, through someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard, just to walk in and be right. The week unfolded like a quiet unraveling. Other cafes, similar in name and signage, were visited in turn. He didn't carry a camera crew, didn't wear a badge in neon. He arrived before the doors opened, observed the staff who thought they were invisible before the first customer walked in. He watched how gloves were used, or not, how dates were written on storage bins or not, how managers clocked in 15 minutes late and still demanded urgency from others. And in each place, when he stood too long near the sink or leaned too slowly into the kitchen, someone would always say it. Sometimes gently, sometimes mockingly. You don't even work here. But the moment they spoke it, the room changed. Because he did work there. Not as one of them, but over all of them. He walked through 3 branches that week. At one, he found the back freezer vent taped with cardboard, dripping water onto cardboard crates below. At another, the milk steaming wand held mold deep in its base. One branch had failed to separate raw meat prep from vegetable slicing on their shared boards. Each violation small in appearance but massive in implication. He said nothing until each report was complete. And by Friday, 4 locations bore red inspection tags. The news spread, not through media but whispers. Staff who once dismissed him now warned others to stay alert. They didn't call him by name. They called him that inspector or the one who doesn't talk. His silence made him larger than fact. Some said he carried a hidden camera. Some said he worked for the mayor. One rumor said he used to be a chef who lost someone to food poisoning and made it his life's work to expose the careless. None of it was true, but none of it was wrong either. Because he had seen loss. Not dramatic, not viral. Just quiet failure in places where people expected care. He remembered the little girl whose allergy was dismissed. The elderly man whose sandwich had mold buried under melted cheese. The immigrant mother told to stop complaining about undercooked meat. Each time, apologies came too late. He moved through the city not to punish, but to remind that behind every glove not changed, behind every uncleaned sink was someone's child, someone's parent, someone whose trust was placed in strangers with aprons. And that trust mattered. By the end of that week, the franchise's corporate office reached out. A formal letter, requesting a meeting, requesting clarification, requesting an explanation. But he didn't respond directly. He let the report speak, let the paperwork mount. Because if they had listened to his silence the first time, they wouldn't be reacting to his authority now. They would have corrected themselves before he had to arrive. He returned to the first cafe, the one that told him he didn't work there. The red tag still hung, faded slightly. Inside, no one cleaned, no one prepared. The lights were dim, the manager gone. the barista reassigned. The building waited. Not for rescue, but for reckoning. He stepped inside, alone, and stood where it all began. Where they asked who he was instead of asking what they were doing wrong. He looked around, then walked the floor once more. He wasn't checking. He was remembering. Because his work wasn't just about correction. It was about memory. And every step he took reinforced the truth that inspection wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Even when those being protected didn't know they needed it. The city moved as it always had. Taxi horns bled into crosswalk warnings. Vendors called into the streets from behind hot grills and ice chests. Students darted through intersections with earbuds in. Everything in motion. Everything urgent. And yet, within this endless movement, he walked like a man who had no need to chase time. He carried no briefcase. He wore no logo. His badge remained tucked away, not from fear, but from intention. Visibility wasn't power. Knowledge was. He stepped into the municipal building just before 10 a.m., where the glass walls reflected columns of morning light like a quiet cathedral. His shoes echoed across the polished floor. The clerk at the front desk gave a nod, recognition without words, and he passed through the security gate with nothing more than presence. On the fourth floor, a hallway led to the Office of Community Health Compliance. A long name for a quiet purpose. Inside, the briefing room was already full. Inspectors sat in rows, each at attention, each with a notepad open or tablet blinking. The walls bore reports from the last 6 months, graphs, bulletins, images of infraction after infraction. But the energy in the room was not of defeat. It was preparation. He entered without greeting, without disrupting, and found a seat along the side wall. He didn't speak. He never had to. When the director stepped up to the podium, the room fell still. She didn't mention names. She didn't have to. She spoke of patterns. She spoke of silence. She spoke of the inspector whose reports had triggered a broader audit, uncovering not just unsafe conditions, but a culture of dismissal, of profiling, of prioritizing profit over principle. She held up one of his photographs. No identifier, just an image of a single glove stained with age and carelessness. She let it linger on the screen, and the room understood. She closed by stating what was already known. Disciplinary actions had been issued. Trainings would be overhauled. Franchise licenses across the district were under review. But most importantly, she said, they had learned the value of presence without performance. The inspector didn't clap. He didn't need to. Recognition had never been the goal. Accountability had. After the meeting, a young inspector approached him outside the building. She was new, sharp-eyed, humble in her posture. She handed him a printout of one of his field reports. He read her name in the corner. She had annotated it not with corrections but with questions. Notes, observations, curiosity, not challenge. He nodded, handed it back, and walked on. That afternoon, he made no inspections. Instead, he returned to the place where it all started. The first cafe. The door was still locked, but the red tag was gone. Not replaced, just removed. Inside, renovation signs were taped to the glass. Permit number. A new name registered under a different owner. He didn't enter. He didn't need to. He stood outside for one long breath, then walked on. Across the street, a woman sat at a bus stop bench, sipping from a to-go cup. The sleeve bore a new logo, the health grade printed clearly. Her drink was untouched. She read a book as she waited. He nodded slightly, then moved past her, melting into the stream of bodies moving toward the next intersection. Somewhere else, another door would open. Another room would dismiss him. Another sentence would rise, "You don't even work here." And once again, he would smile silently inside. Because that was the cue. That meant they hadn't seen him. Not really. Not yet. But they would. By the time he left, they always did. Because justice doesn't shout. It observes. And then it writes.